The horizon of medieval Europe breaks at dawn. Wheat fields stretch as far as the eye can see, bathed in cold, golden light. Stone villages rise through the morning mist. Sharp steeples pierce a gray sky over a continent that had already sent generations of armed men to the east and lost nearly all of them. The year is 1212. The Crusades have been going on for 118 years. Jerusalem fell to Saladin in 1187, and no Christian army had managed to take it back since. The Fourth Crusade, ended just 7 years earlier, had gone so spectacularly off course that it ended with the sack of Constantinople, a Christian city ransacked by the Crusaders themselves. Europe was exhausted, and it was in this soil of disillusionment and desperate faith that something without precedent in the history of the continent began to take root. It would not come from kings, it would not come from knights, it would come from children. If you're already sensing that this story is unlike anything you've heard about the Crusades, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Every week we bring you episodes like this one, stories that history almost forgot to tell. The fields of northern France, in the region of Vendôme, hold the beginning of everything. This is where Stephen of Cloyes appears, a boy of around 12 years old who claims to have received a letter directly from Jesus Christ. The letter, which Stephen says was delivered by a mysterious pilgrim, carried a divine mission: gather the innocent children of Christendom and march to the Mediterranean. The waters, he promised, would part, as they had in the time of Moses, and they would walk across the seabed all the way to the Holy Land. No swords, no armor, only the pure faith of children, which would accomplish what the brute force of adults had failed to do. When Stephen arrived at the court of King Philip II of France to present his mission, the king consulted his theologians and sent the boy away. The scholars said it was madness, but Stephen did not need kings. He only needed words, and he had those in abundance. The chronicles say he preached with an eloquence that seemed unnatural for his age, that he wept as he spoke, and that the weeping spread through the crowd like wildfire. Wherever he went, children followed. By the spring of 1212, thousands were already marching behind him. The numbers vary depending on the source. Some chronicles speak of 30,000, others of 50,000. Modern historians put the figure somewhere between 10 and 15,000 participants, which by any measure stands as one of the most extraordinary spontaneous mobilizations of young people ever recorded in human history. These were not all children in the sense we understand today. There were teenagers, young adults, landless peasants, minor clerics, women. But the driving force, the heart of the procession, was the young, many of them under 15, carrying makeshift crosses and singing hymns as they walked south. Almost simultaneously, 1,000 miles away in the Rhine Valley, in the territory of the Holy Roman Empire, a young man named Nicholas of Cologne was gathering his own crowd. The son of a merchant, Nicholas was apparently older than Stephen, perhaps 17 or 18, and held a slightly different vision. Rather than waiting for the sea to part, he believed they would cross the Mediterranean by ship, and that the Saracens, moved by the innocence of the pilgrims, would willingly convert to Christianity. Two teenage leaders, two armies of children, two roads converging toward the same abyss. Nicholas's column made its way south along the Rhine and into the Swiss Alps. It was summer, and the warmth that greeted the young Germans on the plains quickly gave way to biting cold as they climbed into the mountains. The Alps showed no mercy. There were no proper roads, only trails used by merchants and adult pilgrims, well-fed and properly equipped. Nicholas's followers wore sandals, or nothing at all on their feet. They carried only what they could manage on their backs. The chronicles kept by monasteries along the route record the passing of the column with a mixture of awe and dread. Barefoot children crossing the Mont Cenis Pass in August, feet raw and bleeding, still singing. Many died in the Alps. No precise numbers survive, The Middle Ages did not carefully count its nameless dead. But monastic records from northern Italy describe young Germans arriving in Lombardy in a state of severe exhaustion, with ulcerated limbs, fever, and eyes that had long since lost the gleam of early enthusiasm. Some turned back. Others simply vanished in the mountains, swallowed by early snowfall or by the sheer disorientation of the terrain. Those who made it to Italy were met with a new reality. No one was expecting them. Italian cities received them with bewilderment, sometimes with compassion, sometimes with hostility. There were no ships in Genoa willing to carry them to the Holy Land for free. The sea did not part, and Nicholas, for whom the miracle had seemed all but certain, had no answer to give. Stephen's column of French children, meanwhile, was following a different path, though no less tragic a one. They descended the Rhone valley toward Marseille, with the certainty of a miracle before them. When they finally reached the port, and felt for the first time the salt air of the Mediterranean, that vast, indifferent blue, many of the children fell to their knees and prayed. They waited for the waters to draw back. The waters did not draw back. That was when two men stepped forward. Prosperous merchants from Marseille, known as Hugo Ferres and William Porcus, names that history has preserved with a bitter irony, for both would be forever linked to one of the coldest betrayals of the medieval era. They approached Stephen with an offer that sounded like divine providence. They would provide 7 ships, free of charge, out of love for God, to carry the children to the Holy Land. No payment, no conditions, pure Christian generosity. The ships left Marseille in 1212, filled with young people singing and praying. 2 of them were wrecked in a storm off the coast of Sardinia, near islands that still bear the name San Pietro, Saint Peter. Everyone on board perished. The remaining 5 ships, however, did reach their destination, which was not the Holy Land. It was the slave markets of Bougie and Alexandria, on the North African coast. Hugo Ferrius and William Porcus were not merchants driven by faith. They were slave traders with well-established routes across the Mediterranean and connections in the Muslim markets of North Africa. The entire operation had been planned from the start. The children were unloaded and distributed among local merchants. Some of the Islamic chronicles that survived the period, in particular the records of the Arab chronicler Ibn Khaldun, mention the arrival of a group of young Europeans in the markets of Alexandria, describing them as fair-skinned, healthy, and innocent in appearance. They were precisely the kind of slave that commanded the highest prices. If this story is hitting you hard, if you never imagined something like this could have happened in the history of the Crusades, go ahead and leave a like right now. It helps this episode reach more people who deserve to know this story. Stephen of Cloyes was not among those sold. There is no record of what became of him after the ships departed. Some historians believe he never boarded at all, that he was left behind in Marseille as the column fell apart. Others suggest he died during the voyage, or was sold alongside the others. His name disappears from the record after 1212 as abruptly as it had appeared, like a candle snuffed out by the wind. Nicholas of Cologne's fate is slightly better documented, though no less bleak. After the failure in Genoa, part of his following pressed on towards southern Italy, reaching Brindisi in hopes of finding ships to the east. They found none. The local bishop dismissed them gently, but without any alternative to offer. The column fell apart. Some of the young managed to make their way back to Germany, a journey of many months on foot in reverse through the same Alps that had already taken their toll. Many never made it. Nicholas, according to a later chronicle of uncertain reliability, was said to have been hanged by his own father, shamed by the public scandal his son had caused. Other accounts simply lose track of him somewhere on the roads of southern Europe, with no conclusion. What remained was silence. And within that silence, the questions that medieval and modern historians have never been able to fully answer. How did thousands of children come to abandon their families and march hundreds of miles toward an unknown fate. Who were the adults who took part and allowed it to happen? And to what extent were Stephen and Nicholas sincere visionaries, themselves manipulated by forces beyond their understanding, or willing instruments of interests we have never fully grasped? And here's where I want to hear from you. In your opinion, were Stephen and Nicholas genuine believers, young men who truly thought they were doing God's work? Or were they pawns in someone else's game, used by adults with very different agendas? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This is one of the biggest open debates among medieval historians today, and I want to know what you think. Modern historiography has continued to wrestle with the very nature of the event. The German scholar Peter Ratz, in his 1977 study, argued that the surviving sources are so fragmentary and contradictory that any precise reconstruction is impossible. Some historians have even questioned whether the Children's Crusade unfolded exactly as the chronicles describe, whether the participants were truly children, or whether the Latin term pueri used in the sources referred more broadly to young adults of low social standing. Others, such as the American historian Gary Dixon, maintain that the mobilization was real, massive, and that its spontaneous, popular character is precisely what makes it historically unique. What the chronicles leave no room to doubt is that many set out and few returned, that the Mediterranean did not part, that faith alone was not enough, and that the bodies of those young people, those who died in the Alps, those who drowned in the wreck off Sardinia, those who were sold in the markets of Alexandria and Bougie, never made it home. The fields of Vendôme, in northern France, where it all began, are quiet now. The wheat has been harvested. The fields stand empty. The wind bends the dry grass between the stones of a road that could have led anywhere. There are no monuments. There are no gravestones. There is nothing to mark the place where a 12-year-old boy once claimed to have received a letter from heaven and convinced thousands to believe him. But they existed. They marched. They sang hymns while crossing mountains barefoot. They saw the sea for the first time and believed, with all the certainty a child is capable of, that it would open up to receive them. That certainty, naive, devastating, and entirely human, is something history cannot and must not erase. The innocents deserve to be remembered, not as a cautionary tale about the Middle Ages, not as a symbol of medieval superstition, but for what they were, young human beings who believed in something greater than themselves and paid for it with everything they had. In a world that so often meets faith with betrayal, the Children's Crusade stands as one of the most harrowing testaments to what innocence can cost, and to how much we owe it to protect it.